Before we get into today's video, I just wanted to give a huge thank you to everyone who helped me out in this collaboration. This is a collaboration I've been wanting to do for a while, and we finally got around to getting it done. We really hope you all enjoy it, and if you're looking for more scary content, I highly recommend you go check out these channels. There will be links to everyone's channels in the description, as well as timestamps in the description, as well as in the comments. And without any further ado, let's begin. My wife and I are outdoorsy people. Our first date was a picnic in the middle of the woods, and our wedding was in my parents' backyard, which is almost completely surrounded by forests. This matters because this story begins and ends in a forest. Late summer of 2014. It was one of those moist kind of summer days. My lady and I went on our weekly stroll through a forest near our home. About 3/4 of the way through, she noticed a pile of hair, wire-like hair. Of course we didn't touch it, but we didn't know what to do. It was clearly hair from a person's head, not an animal or anything, but other than that, we didn't think much of it. The next week we went back, but this time the hair was gone. In its place was a letter. It was pretty obvious that it had just been placed there, as if someone was waiting for us. The letter read, "Why did you ignore me?" I told my wife it was just trash, but obviously she didn't believe me, but she knew she was better off not knowing. Early summer of 2015. Nothing has happened since, and I wish it would have stayed that way. We went for a walk around the same area that we made our discovery in. We never really talked about it, but if it did come up, we would joke about it, saying that Brittany was at it again or something. At this time, my wife is about 4.5 months pregnant, so we took an easier path. About halfway through our walk, I heard a whimper to my right. I looked over, and I saw this woman, probably in her early 40s. She was extremely dirty, as if she had been rolling in the dirt for days. She was holding onto trees, digging her mostly broken fingernails into the bark. I took my wife's arm and led her behind me and asked the woman, "Ma'am, are you alright? Do you need me to call someone for you?" She replied, but I couldn't make out what she said. "Pardon?" "Why? Why?" she screamed. Then she started vomiting what looked like black mud. I motioned for my wife to start walking away, while I stayed behind to make sure she didn't follow or chase us. She didn't hesitate walking off, knowing that she was pregnant was probably the likely reason. But when the woman noticed my wife was walking away, she charged at us. Unknowing of her strength, I wasn't prepared to be pushed down. I fell on my back and she was on top of me. She tried to scramble to her feet while staring in the direction my wife was now running in. I tightly wrapped my arms around this woman, and she started vomiting on my forehead. She tried screaming, but she would just choke. Once she had finished, she screamed, "Why did you ignore me?" But I was too engaged in the idea of how the fuck am I going to get out of this, rather than having a conversation with her. I started to wiggle to try to get myself on top of her, and once I did, what next? Stand up, shake hands, and leave? No. My face was right on her breasts, so I couldn't just whip my face into hers. I got my arms out from under her, and I used them to hold her arms down. I lift myself, almost like a push-up, then I pushed my boot into her stomach and I mentally counted to 5. Then I, accidentally, kicked her in the chin with my other boot, and I took off. I looked back at her gripping her jaw and reaching for me while screaming. It's amazing how fast a person can run when they really feel they could die. I dodged every rock and tree, and I even went off the trail just in case she got up and tried to run after me. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I meet the edge of the forest and the side of the road. Our town is half a forest. I look left, then right. My wife is nowhere to be seen. I ran to our car, and she wasn't there either. I leapt into the driver's seat and started screaming and pulling at my face, punching the wheel and stomping my feet. Then I heard crying and screaming in the back. It was the love of my life, lying on the seat holding her ears, knees to her chest, or as close as they could get. I pulled myself back there so fast and I hugged her so tight. She smacked me off her nearly immediately due to the vomit on my head. I climbed back up front and took off out of there before the crazy lady had a chance to make it to our vehicle. As an end note, we did not call the police because this experience caused my wife a lot of stress and sleepless nights, which ultimately led to a miscarriage, and we chose to forget. It's been 5 years since then, and we now have 2 beautiful boys, but we don't go on walks where there aren't roads or buildings nearby. We never saw this woman again, and I hope we never do.
This happened to me back in the summer of 2010. I remember specifically because that was the year that I graduated high school. I graduated in May, and this incident took place about a month after. I was 18 years old, and I told my parents that I was going to take a year off and pretty much do whatever I wanted to. I felt that I was entitled to make this decision because I spent years in a monotonous government-ran institution being fed the bullshit about how great America is. Okay. It was around the end of June, and the 4th of July was approaching, and I got the brilliant idea that I was going to spend the 4th with my family in the state of Arkansas. I decided to make the 15-hour drive from where I lived in Florida to Little Rock. If you encounter a lot of traffic, it's more like 24 hours. This would be the first time I made a road trip by myself, but I was ready to get out of my home state and go on an adventure before I slipped into the slave-like routine of working at some shitty job 40 hours a week and paying rent and all that good stuff. I set off on my trip to Arkansas on July 1st, the day after my mother's birthday. For those of you who are curious, getting out of the state of Florida is literally half the journey. Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana are a cakewalk. Well, I can't recommend stopping in Alabama if you can help it. You'll understand why soon enough. I finally crossed the Florida state line into Alabama, and at this point, I was feeling very tired and drained. Driving non-stop for hours can really take it out of you. I got off at the nearest exit and made my way to the closest gas station I could find. I had about a half a tank, so I would take this opportunity to fuel up as well and purchase some energy drinks to give me a boost. This gas station was a bit isolated, and there was only one car parked there that I assumed belonged to an employee. I pulled up to the gas pump and made my way inside the gas station. Upon entering, I got the vibe that the cashier wasn't having the best of nights. She looked to be about middle-aged, blonde hair, and had large bags under her eyes. I greeted her with a friendly, "Hey, how's it going?" She just looked up from the magazine she was reading, briefly, and stared at me blankly, and then went back to reading. Now, that's quality customer service. I was thinking to myself, well, that's rude. But I didn't have time to ponder about this. I needed to get back on the road. I went to the wall of coolers where they kept the canned beverages and grabbed 2 Rockstar energy drinks. I remember chuckling when I saw the cans of Four Loko next to where they kept the energy drinks. Me and my friends have had a lot of good times with Four Lokos. I grabbed the drinks and felt my phone vibrate. It was an email notification. While I was checking my phone, I heard the main entrance door open and saw 2 very large, intimidating Caucasian men enter the store. Both of these guys were bald, and I could tell by the way they were talking that they had been drinking. One was shorter than the other. The short one looked like he was dressed to go clubbing or something. He had on a black collared shirt with some designer blue jeans. The taller one looked like he just got back from a construction site. They both had similar facial features, leading me to believe that they may have been brothers. Before I continue, I need to give a side note. I am very timid looking and am extremely antisocial. I guess this is one of the reasons why I have such a negative outlook on life, but nevertheless, every time someone who I don't know insults me or says some smart-ass remark about me, I have a tendency to take it to heart. And seeing how these guys were acting, I knew that if they noticed me, they would say something discouraging towards me. I know it sounds shallow, but I really don't like people giving me shit for no reason. So with this in mind, I just sort of hung out towards the back of the store. These two guys didn't look like they were interested in going back there to where I was. They went directly to the cashier. I figured that they were going to buy some cigarettes or some tobacco dip and then leave. I heard the guys talking with the cashier, but I couldn't tell what they were saying due to the country music coming from a nearby overhead speaker. What happened next made my jaw drop. The man in the collared shirt reached over the counter and grabbed the female cashier and pulled her over with one arm, slammed her to the ground, and then with his other hand, he reached behind him and pulled out a black handgun and pointed it directly at her face. If you've ever seen a movie called Crank, there's a scene where Jason Statham pulls a convenience store worker from behind a counter in one swift movement and points a gun at his face. This was nearly identical to that. At that moment, I became scared for my life. I quickly crouched down from where I was standing, which was by a sunglasses rack, and listened carefully to what transpired next. I heard the man who I assumed had the gun shout,
"You fucking bitch. Don't you fucking disrespect me. You fucking whore, I'll kill you."
I could hear the woman start to sob. Then the man said,
"I bet you won't talk your shit now, will you, bitch?"
Then I heard the other guy speak up.
"If you kill this bitch, you know we're gonna have to kill anyone else who happens to drive up on this shit. There's a car parked out by one of the pumps. If we fuck up again, we're gonna be locked away for a long time."
When I heard this, my stomach dropped. My mind began to race. I was thinking that if they were willing to kill anyone who drove up to this gas station, I could only imagine what they would do to me if they found out I was hiding back here. To make things worse, the cashier counter was next to the only exit out of there. My heart began to beat rapidly. Thoughts of the man in the black-collared shirt walking up to me and putting a bullet in my head invaded my mind. I shuddered to think that my end would be here, at this gas station, in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. My thoughts were interrupted by one of the guys saying,
"Fuck it,"
followed by the sound of the main entry-exit doors swinging open. I was still too scared to look up, but I did hear a car burning rubber as it pulled out of the parking lot. I gathered the courage to get up from my hiding spot and look around. I saw the still sobbing cashier quickly making her way towards the employee room, which was behind the counter. She slammed the door behind her. I stared out the gas station windows to my left, at the gas pumps and the front parking area. My Chevy Cavalier was still sitting at one of the gas pumps, thank goodness. But nothing else was in sight. I could hear the female cashier bawling her eyes out from the back room, so I took it upon myself to contact the police. I put the drinks I intended on purchasing back in the cooler and stepped outside the gas station and called the police. I just hung around by my car, waiting for them to show up. About 10 minutes later, 4 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot. I'll spare you the intricacies of law enforcement procedure when it comes to dealing with this sort of thing. Long story short, I gave my written statement, gave them a number where they could reach me at, and went back to my adventurous journey. Needless to say, I didn't get off at another exit for gas until a few hours had passed. I have never heard any follow-up to this incident, nor have I come across any public information. As far as I know, the crazy Bald brothers were never found.
This happened nearly 5 years ago, but unfortunately, the memory remains very integrated inside my mind. A bit of context to get started. I live in a medium city that in 2011 was badly affected by a strong earthquake. Around 200 people were killed, and a large proportion of the city's older buildings were either outright destroyed or deemed uninhabitable. One such building was the Mental Rehabilitation Centre, Sunnyside. Naturally, having a significant number of mentally ill patients without a roof over their heads only exaggerated the city's already great problems. Short-term solutions were desperately needed. From my understanding, hospitals with the necessary facilities took the bulk of the load, with other temporary hospices and homestays forced to become somewhat of a more permanent fixture of housing these patients, even if they lacked the security that was absolutely essential to house these patients. I later come to learn that one of these temporary hospices was less than a block away from my house. My house, along with the majority of the houses on the street, was backed onto a small creek which runs through the suburb. It's relatively common for our neighbours to wade down the creek to visit people who live in the houses along the creek or on the other side of the embankment, as virtually none of the properties had a back fence to prevent access. So it's about 4 weeks after the initial quake. Things are beginning to turn back to normality. We're still being forced to use a communal portaloo out on the road, but in general, we're on the mend. It was a Sunday night and I'd gone to bed early because tomorrow we were going to go on our first day back to work in almost a month. At some points at night, I later found out it was around 1:30 AM, I began to stir as I realised that soft laughter I was hearing in my dreams was actually physical, real life laughing. It was very faint, childlike, almost a giggle, but it was there. Sitting up in my dreary state, I assumed that my brother had left the television on in the lounge, so dragging myself out of bed, I staggered down the hallway to switch it off. However, as I approached the living room, I soon realised that this laughter isn't increasing in volume, and upon reaching the room I confirmed that the TV's not on, or the radio. Suddenly, feeling a bit foolish, I make my way back up to my room when I hear no further giggling, passing it off as my sleep-deprivated brain playing tricks on me. I get back into bed and fall asleep. An hour later though, I was soon awakened again, this time by the soft plucking of my metal steel guitar, which I kept in my office at the other end of the hall. No melody, just touches. Feeling very frustrated at this point for being woken up twice in the night, I immediately fling myself out of bed, determined to find out what the source of this irritating noise is. Before I can make it 2 steps towards the door, the noise comes to an abrupt halt, and I realise that it was too coming from my room. I whirl around to see what could have possibly been making all of this noise all at once, and suddenly, I feel the winds being knocked out of me. Sitting in the corner of my room cross-legged, on a puddle of a wet blanket, is a large, shaggy man wearing socks, clothes and holding my guitar. A million simultaneous thoughts go through my mind in an instant. The obvious, what the fuck? What the fuck? Who the fuck? How? But also, bizarre thought process like, God, it annoys me when people touch my guitar without asking. I was in that confused and tired of a state. All my emotions and feelings were very primitive at this point. All logical thought seemed to come to a complete standstill at this point, and for whatever reason, some deep-seated social cue came roaring into life, and I stuttered the words, You want a cup of tea? Because, you know, obviously the first thing you do when somebody comes to your house is offer them a cup of tea, right? The man seemed pleased with this interaction, perks up and nods brightly. Finally, the rational part of my brain comes out from its coma or whatever. I turn around and sprint for the room door, slamming it shut behind me. I scream for my brother to call the police while holding onto the door handle for my dear life, dreading what was gonna happen. There's a man in my fucking room! He comes running and, once seeing the look of terror on my face, doesn't waste any time at all to make the call. While listening to him give the operator our address and pleading for them to hurry, I hear a soft knock on the door on the other side. No sugar, please. The word mindfucked comes straight to mind when I think about this moment. I fully expected to reach down, pinch my arm, and awaken from the most vivid dream of my life. The police arrived not long after. There were many patrols due to looters, and my brother led them to the end of the hall, my knuckles turning white on the doorknob. After mentally bracing myself, I let go of the door handle and leapt backwards, letting the policemen do their thing. They rushed into the room, tasers drawn, shouting at this invader to show himself. Their aggression was short-lived, however, and I was close enough to see why. The man was simply sitting on the edge of my bed now, assuming himself by playing with one of my figurines. I think the officers were also taken aback by this, and they halted for a second before continuing, a touch more gingerly. To cut a rather long-winded story short and to confirm what you probably already deduced, yes, this was a mental patient who slipped out of his temporary hospice and waded along the river looking for some houses to explore. Muddy footprints onto my neighbour's decks confirmed that he had originally tried to enter their homes. I was simply the one foolish enough to leave his unlocked. The police took him away, and they later gave me a follow-up to call and say that he had been put into a far more secure location, but I should still be a lot more vigilant in case that he comes back to my house. In hindsight, I believe that this man was totally harmless. Ill, yes, obviously, but not malicious. There was many of times that he could have come to harm me, had that have been his intent, but he did not do so. He simply took to my unlocked door as an invitation to come in. I didn't want to damage the life of an already damaged and disturbed person. The incident left me pretty shaken up, excuse the earthquake pun, for quite some time, and I'm still struggling to fall asleep even now. But for the most part, I've moved on. There is one thing that I've never been able to let go of, however. I believe this one detail has left a permanent scar on me and in my mind. As the police were leading the man from my house, he uttered a short giggle, the same one I heard when I was awoken originally. They still didn't find the man under his bed.
Back in 2010, when I was 8 years old, my sister got her first own laptop for her 13th birthday, a Sony Vaio. Back on the family computer, when she had the chance to, she would always be on it, talking to her friends on Chat Avenue. She was on so much, she was made a moderator. So of course, driven by pride and popularity, she was straight back on it the day she got her laptop set up. Now, she had a lot of friends on there that she chatted with, but there was one person in particular that she was constantly talking to. And I mean constantly talking to Cody 240. Cody introduced himself as a 15-year-old boy from Manchester, New Hampshire. But as we are from Kent, he did not specify we thought the English Manchester. We later find out he traveled from America. I can only describe it as he was almost head over heels in love with my sister, to a point it was almost disturbing. When she got home from school, he would already be there, waiting for her. They would talk far into the night. I would be on the top bunk of our bed drifting off to sleep, and she would still be talking to him. They would sometimes cam as well, and he would say hello to me if I was there. But he never showed his face on cam, something I should have seen as a red flag for my sister. He just wore long hoodies with his head down and said it would ruin his confidence because he always felt ugly. Most of the time, Cody was nice and kind to my sister, but sometimes he wasn't. If she wasn't on immediately when she got home, or if we went on holiday or were away, he would become emotionally abusive. He would spread rumors about my sister, telling everyone in the chat that Gracie, my sister, is a whore. Gracie sends me naked pictures and talks badly about all of you, all of which none of is true. They would ban him, but he would come back with different names and sob stories until people pitied him enough to let him back in on his other username. My sister would cry her eyes out when the other mods told her of his doings, but as the kind person she is, she would always give him another chance. Until enough was finally enough. And in the March of 2011, after almost a year of talking to him, she gave in and told all the other mods to ban him on the site if he ever tries to resurface. It's the summer of 2011, and we've heard nothing from Cody. I'm playing with my friends at lunch one day in my primary school when the lunch monitor comes and tells me my dad is in the waiting room, waiting for me. I find this odd as I walk, as my dad would surely be fast asleep right now, as it's 12 and he works a graveyard shift from 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. 5 days a week. Nevertheless, I go to the office, and the receptionist directs me down to the waiting room. I enter, and nobody's there, so I sit down for a while. And then I see the silhouette from outside the opaque glass windows. For what was probably around 2 minutes, someone just stood there loitering until I asked, "Dad?" A man opened the door and just stared at me, smiling. Alas, it was not my dad. And if this man was Cody, he was definitely not a 15-year-old boy, more like a late 40s man with poor grooming skills. He was grinning in such a way that one would grin in those dental adverts, and then just like that, he placed a note on the chair next to me and ran out, vaulting over the outside hedge and running down the road, in the direction of my sister's secondary school. I picked up the note. It was from my sister's school planner, which I later found out that she had left on the corridor shelf, and which is how I later found out the man had broken into our house. I read the note as best I could with his scribbly writing and then crumpled it up and shoved it into my jumper sleeve. I started to cry as I walked out. I was scared for my sister, and I thought he was going to hurt me. The note read, "If I don't find you, at least you will know how much I care for this letter. Baby, we are meant for each other. I came all this way for you. You know I'd do anything. We belong together. You belong with me. I have no reason to live without you, so save me, baby. It will be hard, but save me. Your one and only, X." I felt sick. The receptionist asked me if I was alright, and I told her yes, but I went and cried for the rest of lunch that day. When school finished, I went and got my bike and rode fast, despite the road being a bumpy, typical countryside obstacle course. In the end, I fell off my bike trying to let a car pass, but the adrenaline running through me was so thick, I just placed my bike aside and ran the last sprint to my sister's school. I stopped short outside the gate as I saw the same man waiting outside, arms crossed, something metallic glistening in the side of his pocket. It didn't look like a meat cleaver or something brutal, but it was like a butter knife with more jagged edges. I didn't want to run into him again, so I just put my coat hood up and calmly crossed the road. He was on his phone, texting and kind of bobbing his legs, like you do when waiting impatiently for something. I got the note out as fast as I could and walked and read it again. My sister had told a lot, but if this was Cody, how could he have found us? And where was my sister now? And then I remembered it was Tuesday, and it was her year's day to have their last 2 periods in the local church. I guessed I had about 5 minutes before 3:30, and I was out of the view of the school, so I had some time to run. I made it to the church as she was leaving with a couple of friends and told her a man was here for her. I gave her the note, and she and her friends started reading it. She then emerged again, grabbed me, and ran. I asked her why we were running, but she just kept pulling my arm to run faster. We made it to the back of the house until she told me that if that note is from her planner, he already probably knew where she was. We woke up our dad inside and told him what had happened. He read the note and we all called the police. We came down to the station and I gave a description. 2 weeks pass. Nothing. Another 2 weeks pass. And we end up going back to the police, but to no avail. Cody was never found. It was like he never existed. My sister discontinued her use of Chat Avenue after that, but that was only because people kept saying that Cody had come in and told them he was coming back for her. And she will regret leaving the love of her life.
When I was about 6 or 7, I used to take swimming lessons at a local pool after finishing school twice a week, on Wednesdays and Fridays. On Fridays, my mom would take me into McDonald's to get a milkshake as a treat afterwards. I'd sit and drink my shake, then we'd go home. No problems. This day was different. I had finished my shake and I wanted to use the toilet before we left. So in I went, into the ladies' room on my own, as I usually did. And when I noticed one cubicle was locked, I thought nothing of it. I went into the second, did my thing, flushed, and then went to wash my hands. That is when I noticed that the person in the other cubicle was unlocking the door, but I hadn't heard them flush. I turned around and it was a man, old, disgusting, and tall. Why was he there? I innocently said, "This is for ladies only, mister." And he said, "Why do you think I'm in here, little girl? It's music to my ears. Where's your mummy?" He took a few strands of my hair and twirled them between his grimy fingers, and reached out his other hand to grab me by the shoulder. I shook out of his grip and ran as fast as I could back to my mom, crying. I told her what happened, and she told an attendant, but by the time they checked, he'd managed to slip out unnoticed into the busy street. I really hope he never managed to get his hands on any little girls.
This is the scariest episode from my childhood. It took place in 1991, when I was 8 years old. I lived in a village on the Norwegian countryside, with my parents and 2 older brothers. There weren't many kids around for us to play with, so we always stuck together, despite the age difference. I was 8, my brothers 10 and 12. It was a safe neighbourhood, and we were outdoorsy kids. It was fine for us just to return home to eat, and then go back out again to play in the woods or go fishing in the nearby lake. In the autumn of 1991, my oldest brother dared us to sneak through the hedge to the abandoned property that was located close by. We had always thought of it as a haunted house, but really it was the old house where the man who started the village brick factory once lived. No one had lived there for ages, and the paint was starting to peel off and several windows were broken. Our parents would tell us never to go there. Their reason was of course that they feared we would get hurt playing there, but we thought it was because it was haunted. But that day, we dared to walk around in the garden, or whatever you want to call it. It had a now dried up pond, an old well, several old dying fruit trees, and even tools in the old shed. It looked as if someone had just walked out there one day and had never returned, leaving everything as it was. We soon came to think of the garden as ours, and played there all the time. We would climb the trees, build things, and it was great. It was our very own secret playground. We suspected that the people in the village had seen us, because soon our parents would ask us if we had gone there despite it being strictly forbidden, which of course we denied, but someone must have complained. We were rather loud and untamed kids. Until one day, it was in November. I remember since it was a few days before my birthday. It was a damp and rainy day, and we weren't really in the mood for playing outside, but our mum had chased us out so she could clean in peace, and we weren't allowed back in for another hour. So we decided to try and open the old cellar. I'm not sure what the word is in English for this kind of cellar, but imagine if you will. It's a hatch that opens almost horizontally to the ground, then a few steps that lead you down into a dugout cellar with stone walls and earthed floor. It was used to store vegetables and such, but it was empty now. All of us climbed down to have a look, The plan was to write our names inside of the cellar, mark it as our own sort of. Suddenly the hatch slammed above us and the cellar became completely dark. I started screaming and my older brothers tried to open the hatch. When my oldest brother, Sindre, pushed the hatch open, he saw a man's hand holding a small axe.
"Come on out, trespassing little brats,"
the voice growled, the axe close to the opening of the hatch. "Hell no," Sindre shouted back and slammed the hatch shut from the inside.
"Alright, little brats. I know you're all in there, all three of you little shits. Does your mum know you're here? I bet she doesn't, does she? No one will look for you."
We heard him dropping the axe and starting to move around with something else. Soon we realised that he had taken a hammer out, and before we knew it, he just started to nail the hatch closed. I threw myself at the hatch, determined to get out, but the moment the hatch opened just a little bit, he reached for the axe.
"Come on now, come on out. It's the better choice really. It must be awfully dark and damp in there. Aren't you afraid of the dark? Go on, let your little brother out."
And we could hear that he was drunk. My other brother, Emil, was pleading with the man to let us go, promising that we would never return, but his words fell on deaf ears. The rain had started to fall heavy now, and we heard thunder outside. The drunken man with the hammer was cursing and moving around outside, clearly bothered by the bad weather.
"I might come back and let you out one day. Or maybe I'll just butcher all three of you,"
he whispered through the wooden door as he hammered the hatch shut. We were too terrified to do anything, but Sindre told us to keep calm and it would be okay. He's surely just as scared as us. The dark was compact inside of the cellar, and it was cold and damp. After a long while of silence from the man outside, we started to wonder if he had left. Sindre decided that we should count to 100 and then try to get out. We counted loudly and then used our hands to find the hatch. It was definitely nailed shut. Sindre told us to feel the stone walls for a loose stone, so we did, cutting our palms up on the sharp edges. Eventually we did find one, and it was surprisingly easy to remove from its place. The cellar was old and had not been tended to in ages, and the rainy climate of the Norwegian coastside had left the wooden hatch doors rather soft with age. The hardest thing was to reach up. The cellar was built in such a way that it was almost impossible to get a good forward motion going in order to break the wood, but fueled by panic and adrenaline, we broke the lower half open. Being closer to the ground, it was softer and easier to tear apart. We started digging the earth with our hands, creating a small opening. Being the smallest, my brothers pushed me out of the cellar so I could see if the man was indeed gone. My brothers were too big to fit in the small opening, and Sindre said I would have to get the hammer and get the hatch open. I was absolutely petrified that the man would come back with an axe and that I would have to run, leaving my brothers to die, or stay and to be slaughtered. At 8 years old, I had no doubt that it would have happened. I got the hammer but couldn't get the nails out, so I used the hammer to simply break the hatch to pieces. Soon all three of us were running for our dear lives across the garden and home, where our mum would throw a fit over the state of our clothes and hands, and determined to know what we had been up to. Nothing, we said. We lied, of course, unsure of what to say. We never went back there again. We never even looked that way. The man with the axe. I have no idea who he was or where he came from. I wonder if he was a drifter, living in the abandoned house, not wanting noisy kids to disturb the peace. This is by far the most fearful episode of my life. We never told anybody about it, but every year when Sindre, Emil and I reunite at the family home for Christmas, we like to ask if there is any news about the old ghost house down the street. I still don't know if anybody moved in there.
It's May 24th, 2006, and I still remember what happened, even though I was only 7 years old. I came back to school with my younger twin sisters at 12 a.m. We were excited, because that day was our brother's birthday. Quickly after our school bus left us right in front of our dad's shop, we ran to the entrance until we reached our apartment on the second floor. The apartment we lived in was very small for a family of 6 members. We had 3 rooms, and all of them had small windows. The only big window we had was a living room's window. It was big enough to let us see almost the whole street. Anyways, our babysitter was about to give us dinner when my dad came to the apartment. It was unusual for him to abandon the shop like that, but he looked worried. He didn't say hello to us or anything. The only thing he did was look out the window. We watched him for a few seconds until he said, "Duck," and we all obeyed. At first I started to giggle because I thought it was just a game, until we heard a bang coming down from the street, then silence. 10 minutes passed and everyone was confused when suddenly my mom opened the door, crying like I've never seen her before. Turns out that she saw everything that happened from outside. She told us that she was just parking her car after going to buy some things for the party when the shooting started. At the same time, a little girl around my age was walking to the building next to us after she left her school bus. Her name was Natalia, and she never saw the lost bullet that killed her. My mom saw her die as 3 people, one of them being the murderer, ran away from a store he was planning to rob. The lost bullet was meant for one of the security guards that spotted the thieves. My mother ran fast to our apartment, confused, and thinking that probably the little girl was me, due to the fact that I looked similar. When she realized that we were fine, she looked less shocked, and did something that surprisingly didn't get her arrested. She went to the kitchen to find some eggs, and an hour later, she was throwing the eggs at the security guards, because if they didn't get distracted by the TV, the little girl could still be alive. Every time I remember what happened that day, I think how close we were to death if we hadn't been so excited about my brother's birthday.
I just got back from the store, and I've got to share this experience I just had with you guys. It may not be as scary as some of the other encounters posted to this subreddit, but it still gives me the chills. Let me start off by saying that this morning I wasn't in the best of moods. I had to work the graveyard shift last night, and I woke up after only 4 hours of sleep with my back killing me. I couldn't get back to sleep, so I decided I would run a few errands since I was now wide awake. I needed a haircut, and my sister works at a salon that is right next to a Target, so after I got my sister to mow my scalp, for free, of course, I popped over to Target, intending to grab a few things before heading home. I was pushing my cart down the frozen food section, and I turned to the corner to get to the next aisle. When I did, a middle-aged lady was pushing her cart in the opposite direction. I nearly bumped into her but stopped before our baskets collided. She gave me a really mean look and said in a bitchy tone, "Excuse me." Again, I have to say I wasn't in the best of moods, and I am a short-tempered person as it is, so without thinking I shot back at her and said, "Shut up, you're fine." Call me an asshole if you want, no one's perfect. But what happened next was just pure insanity. The lady then suddenly left her shopping cart and started to follow me. I noticed this about halfway down the aisle, and I turned around to ask what her problem was. Then, I shit you not, she rolled her eyes back into her head, pointed at me, and screamed very loudly. When I say screamed, I mean she was shrieking at the top of her lungs. It was like something out of The Exorcist. I hurried down the aisle to get away from this insane person, but she started running after me, still pointing at me. Needless to say, all the bystanders immediately stopped what they were doing and stared at us. The lady kept screaming like a banshee at the top of her lungs while she chased me around the store. I finally just took off out of there. I didn't feel like explaining the situation to an employee, and I couldn't stand hearing that ear-piercing screaming a second longer. I ran out of the exit of the store, and I looked back into it as I headed for my car. The lady was standing just outside the now open automated sliding doors, but she was still inside the store, if that makes sense. While she stood there, her mouth was hanging wide open, and she was still pointing at me. Her eyes were still rolled back into her head. All you could see was the whites of her eyes. She suddenly turned around and briskly walked back into the store. Let's just say that I decided to pick up my stuff at Walmart just down the street instead. All I could think the entire drive home was, what the fuck was that?
When I was about 16 or 17 years old, I had a girlfriend who told me about a horrifying experience she had when she was about 12 or 13 years old. She lived outside the city in a typical house surrounded by farms. The surrounding farms were located about half a mile apart from each other. The nearest city, which was a small city, was located about 4.5 miles. I'm describing this place to let you know that there is nothing for you to do out there unless you are visiting someone. Every day she took the bus home from school. She would usually be home alone after school since her parents would still be at work at that time. She was used to it and knew that she had to lock the doors and so on. But one afternoon, she experienced something which scared the life out of her. She was doing her homework in the family living room when she noticed a man staring at her through the window. He wasn't even trying to stay hidden either. He just sat there, and as he saw that she noticed him, a creepy toothless smile grew over his dirty face. She ran around the house in a panic, closing all the blinds and making sure everything was properly secured before calling her parents at work and telling them what was going on. Her parents immediately called the nearest neighbor, who lives almost a mile away. The neighbor went to my girlfriend's house to pick her up and take her to their house to protect her until her parents got home. By the time her neighbor showed up, the man was already gone. When her parents came home, they called the police and told them about everything that had happened. Unfortunately, the police never found the pervert. The thing that makes this story 10 times creepier than the other pervert looking through the window stories is the fact that the pervert must have been following her all the way home, and the fact that he did all this in the bright daylight.
In the year 2013, I was a sophomore in high school in Southern California. I had earlier moved to a city called Menifee, which is mainly a suburb for the working folk in Riverside County. While I was the new kid, I was still able to make a couple of friends pretty quickly. Bradley, Jacob, and Austin. Bradley being the closest friend among these three to this day. I remember being on a Friday during this year's fall season. They all happened to live in a cul-de-sac which was about 1.5 miles from where I lived. Since my neighborhood consisted of elderly people, I usually spent my time over at theirs. The day of this story occurred at one of the times I was visiting over there. Frankly, I don't remember what we actually did that day. All I remember is since it was a Friday, my mom allowed me to stay out later. When the time reached around midnight, my mom texted me and told me to come home as she was going to go to sleep. I would have asked my friends if their parents could give me a ride home, but unfortunately they were all fast asleep, and I didn't want to bug by asking if I could sleep over, so I gave my friends a farewell and headed home. About 5 minutes into my journey, I was really enjoying my walk. The air was nice and cool, and I always loved the night sky. Between mine and my friends' homes, there was an elementary school with a wide green flat park right next to it. The park, having no lights, was totally pitch black. I was about to pass the park when I noticed a man sitting on a bench near the corner of the park close to me, about 100 feet away. I couldn't really see his face, but I could decipher that he was a tall, bald white guy in a black hoodie and shorts. Besides glancing at him once and taking in all those details I said about him, I didn't really pay much mind to him and continued on my way. I just kept walking forward, occasionally glancing at my phone for no particular reason. When I neared the lamppost near the sidewalk I was traveling on, I noticed that when I looked down in front of me, a second shadow opposite of my own was casted. I instantly came to the conclusion that it was somebody else, that guy I had seen earlier most likely being the caster. I tried to quicken my pace, while trying not to make it too obvious, just to get a little bit of distance between me and whoever was behind me. Now, some people probably wouldn't mind or care if they share the sidewalk with a stranger, but since it was late at night, and I'm a pretty scrawny guy, I didn't want to risk getting mugged, so eventually I decided to cross the street. I looked both ways for cars, but obviously it was more to see who was behind me, and sure enough, it was the same man. It was a little brighter due to there being lampposts, and I quickly got another look at him. He was built and about 6 feet tall. After I crossed, I continued down my same route, but shortly after I noticed that the guy had also crossed the street and was once again right behind me. Okay, now I was starting to really freak out as my heart began to beat faster. A little further up the street, the road that ran into my neighborhood was just within sight. At first I was relieved, but then I realized that I didn't want the guy to follow me home and know where I lived. Instead of turning onto my street, I continued walking forward until I approached another street coming off the main road. I quickly sped up and turned in, and once I knew I was a little out of sight, I began to jog away quickly. When I was about 100 yards away from the mouth of the street, I twisted my head around to clarify if the man had continued to follow me. He was. And not just following, he was full on sprinting. At that moment I decided, fuck it, and also began to sprint away. I didn't even know where I was at that point, or which street I was running onto. I just had to get away. After running for a while, I ended up thinking of an idea to run to the side of a house that had 2 trash bins next to it. I laid flat on my belly and faced the street. Luckily for me, I had been wearing a black jacket, so it made it a little easier for me to blend into the darkness around me. I laid there for a few moments when the guy happened to stop running on the sidewalk near where I was laying. He stood there and scanned the area around him really fast. My heart stopped when he looked my way. When he couldn't see me, he continued running in the direction he had been facing. I waited there for probably another 5 minutes just to make sure he was long gone. Afterwards, I bolted straight home, but it still took me about a half hour. I never told my parents about that experience since we had finally settled in and I had made my own group of friends and I didn't want to risk moving again. The event itself slowly faded from my mind until recently. My only precaution was to never walk home at that time again. I never found out who that guy was, but in the years following, I discovered that in the early 2000s, the local high school had a neo-Nazi problem, but it's since been rooted out. I'm not positive that's why he ran after me, but it does seem possible that a white supremacist wouldn't mind roughing up a smaller Latino in the middle of the night when no one else was around.
I've been reading through some of the stories here, and I thought I might add my own. This happened when I was 11. My brothers and I had not long started at a new school. 3 days a week, Mom would drop us off, and the other 2, we caught the bus. This day, Mom dropped us off. As soon as she pulled up, I spotted a man standing at the only gate into the school. Apparently, no one thought that was creepy. I begged my mom to drop us at the back, but she was late for work and wouldn't listen. I waited for Mom to drive off and told my brothers, 9 and 6, to do exactly as I said without question. They nodded and we walked towards the gate. I placed myself between the man and my brothers, making sure I got a good look at him. He was about 6 foot, dark brown hair, tattoo sleeve down his right arm, wearing a black skin-tight t-shirt and camo shorts. As we walked past him, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. In his hand, closest to the school gate, was a pocket knife he was flicking in and out. At that point, priority number 1 was to get my brothers somewhere safe. I made them walk quickly in front of me to the library. I told them not to leave the library until I came back to get them. I then made my way to the office through the staff room. My teacher, Mrs. Muddle, stopped me and tried to make me go back to the front of the school to get to the office. I looked at her and told her, "There's a man in front of the school with a knife." She could see I was serious and let me through. the office lady called the cops, who were quick to show up and arrest the guy. Lunchtime that same day, I was called to the principal's office. Before I could ask what I had done this time, I was always getting into trouble. I was pulled into a hug by some random lady who couldn't stop thanking me for saving her son's life. Turns out, the guy was the father of one of the students who had been physically abusing the kid and his mother. When she decided to leave him and stop him from seeing his son, he decided he would kidnap and kill the boy, because as he saw it, if he couldn't have him, no one would.
This happened about 5 years ago, when I was 16 and was attending my last summer at my sleepaway camp in West Virginia. Granted, I was only there for around a month, but it was the longest month of my life. My cabin was full of girls I knew from previous summers and a girl nobody knew, Mary. She was kind of the oddball out, and it was obvious after a few days that she isolated herself and had a hard time fitting in. So I tried my best to include her in our normal activities while the rest of my friends didn't pay her much attention. After about a week, she started clinging to me, which I figured was because she just liked me as a new friend, and I was the only one that showed her any attention. Wherever I went, she was kind of just there, always a step behind me. We were required to take buddies to the bathroom, and whenever I casually mentioned I was going, she would jump up and volunteer to take me. Nothing too weird. I started noticing strange habits of hers. Whenever we walked to an activity, she would walk next to me, and if she noticed that our walking was out of sync, she would skip to adjust it so that we were walking the same way. Now this sounds a little questionable. I thought maybe I was overthinking it, until several of my friends mentioned that they noticed this stuff was happening without me saying anything. During meals, we were assigned tables, but even though she sat across the entire dining hall away from me, she never stopped watching. I would go up to the buffet and fill my plate, noticing that as I sat down, she would go up and choose the exact same foods as me while still watching. This happened with every activity, from art to sports, etc. Now at this point I wasn't too creeped out. I found her tendencies to be a bit strange, but that's about it. On a Tuesday, I was just starting to ride the horse I was newly assigned to during a ring lesson. This horse was a little bit wild from the get-go and bucked me off, causing me to be forced to stay in the infirmary during the lesson times for the rest of the week. The following week, I watched as Mary went out of her way to request the same horse that I had fallen off of. I was kind of perplexed by this. Of course, the Tuesday of that week, I watched as she threw herself off that horse and was forced to stay in the infirmary alone with me. My 1 hour a day that I could escape her was now also taken away. I started to get really annoyed by her because no matter what I was doing, she was always there. We had to switch bunks midway through the session, and I was genuinely angry when she requested not only the same cabin as me, but also the bed next to mine. We both chose top bunks that were aligned on the same wall, so my feet were at her head. I started to notice even weirder things. I was writing a letter home one day, and I felt like I was being watched. I looked to my right, and I saw Mary was sitting facing forward, but her head was cocked to the side, staring at me with a demonic smile. My stomach dropped. A couple nights after that encounter, I woke up with the same feeling of being watched. It was pitch black, but I grabbed a flashlight to go walk to the bathroom since I was already up. But no, I turned over with my light to see Mary standing next to my bed with her head at my level, watching me sleep. Just standing in the middle of the cabin, staring. I was speechless. I just figured maybe she needed someone to take her to the bathroom. I started to leave for the bathroom and she followed. I was thoroughly creeped. Stuff like that kept happening for the rest of the session, but when her parents finally came to get her, I refused to even look up and say bye. I had never been so happy to leave a place in my life. I can't express the level of creepiness over the computer, but I can say I literally felt like I was in danger when I was with her. And to be honest, I never want to find out why she was so obsessed with me.
So me and my friends Mike and Steve were all chilling at Steve's house late one night back in 2009. I remember specifically because we all went to go see the new Friday the 13th film earlier on that day. We were all just hanging out and listening to music and rocking out like the dorks that we are. My friend's parents were gone for the night, leaving the house all to ourselves. As the song slowly came to an end, we could still hear someone singing from outside. We look outside of the window and see a man under a nearby streetlight that was in front of the house. He was singing and clapping his hands while staring back at us. His long, dark hair was hanging down over his eyes. It was the most insane thing I've ever seen. The others just thought it was some drunk or crazy guy messing around with us and that there was nothing to be worried about. They returned to their rocking. After the next song ended, they heard even louder singing coming from outside again. We opened the blinds to the bedroom window and saw the man's face pressed directly against the window, singing with a smile on his face. His face looked absolutely dreadful, covered with old scars and a row of crooked, blackened, rotting teeth. He was grinning from ear to ear. We quickly closed the blinds, then one of my friends picked up the phone and dialed 911. The cops came and the man was gone by the time they had gotten there. The cops said that if he came back, to call again. So me and my friends didn't think that the creepy man would return after that. But then the phone suddenly rang. When Steve picked it up, he froze in total fear, mouth hanging wide open. He said he heard singing coming from the other end. He then slammed the phone down and called the cops again. This time they found the man lurking around in the backyard. Apparently the man was insane and escaped out of a local asylum. If you're wondering as to how he got Steve's home phone number, the house was for sale at the time, and Steve's dad got the brilliant idea to display the house number on the for sale sign. Genius, right? And the phone call was made from a stolen cell phone. None of us were in any immediate danger, but this was still nope as fuck. This happened about 4 years ago. At the time I was around 8 months pregnant, so very noticeable, and was doing some Christmas shopping at the local mall at around 9 at night. When I finished up on my shopping, I headed out of the mall and towards my truck. At this mall there is a road that goes around the mall, and the parking lot is on the other side. Therefore, you have to cross the road to get to the parking area. As I'm leaving the store, I happen to notice a man standing in the middle of the road. He looked in my direction and made eye contact. I looked away and kept going. At this same time, there were 2 men that walked past him into the mall. He never looks at them or says anything to them, but keeps his eyes on me. I noticed that he started to walk in my direction, but I just kept strolling to my vehicle. Then I hear, "Excuse me, can you help me?" Being Southern has its downfalls, and one of those is having it ingrained into you to be polite. I simply asked, "What do you need?" He looked around and said, "Could you help me start my car? I think my battery is dead." I may be Southern, but I'm not that polite, nor am I stupid. Please remember that I am very much pregnant and a woman walking alone in a parking lot. If he was really having car trouble, it is highly unlikely that he would ask a pregnant woman for help rather than 2 men that just walked past him. At this point, I know it's time to go, so I just say, "Sorry, I can't help," and keep on walking, a little faster this time. I still see him out of the corner of my eye following me. I have my keys out and am ready to go as soon as I make it to the truck. He's still making his way towards me. "You really aren't gonna help me? I just need a jump." Again I say, "Nope, sorry." Finally getting to the truck, I unlock it and jump in. He is practically running towards me now. I locked the doors and tried to get the key in the ignition, but I was shaking at that moment and the damn key would not fit into the ignition. He gets to the truck and hits my window, saying, "I just need your help for a minute." Now I am starting to get angry and yell, "No! Get the hell away from me!" He grabs the door handle and tries to open my door and screams, "Just open the door!" Here is where I lost my cool and made a split-second decision. I have my concealed carry license because there have been other reasons that I need to protect myself that I don't want to get into here. However, I do have a .38 special in my console that I do know how to use. When he tried to open my door, my only thought was to protect my child and myself. I rolled the window down, grabbed the .38, and pointed it right in his face and said, "I'm not gonna tell you again. Get the fuck away from me." He stood there for a moment, in shock I am sure. In that moment, time stopped. I didn't know what he would do, but I knew that I was prepared to use this gun if he made any move toward me. He didn't. He didn't say a word. He turned and ran. I know I should have gotten the hell out of Dodge then, but I couldn't. All I could do was just sit there in shock. I was terrified of not only what he may have done to me if I had not felt that something was wrong, but also that I had just threatened to kill someone. Not a situation I will ever want to be in again. However, should it happen, I still have that .38 and it's loaded up and all ready to go. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Once again, I would really like to thank everyone for helping me out on this. I really had a lot of fun working with you all, and I think it turned out quite nice. For all of you viewing this, I highly recommend you go check out everyone's channels. As I stated before, all the links to everyone's channel will be in the description. I highly recommend you go make your rounds. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.